All right, so today we're diving into one of the most fundamental concepts in Karl Marx's Capital. We're going to look at what he calls the general formula for capital. Now, think of this less like a dry economic formula and more like a detective story. Our mission is to uncover the central mystery of the capitalist economy. How does money almost magically seem to create more money? We're going to follow the clues that Marx lays out to solve this puzzle.
Okay, so to kick things off, Marx asks us to look at two totally different ways that money and goods move around in a market. On the surface, they look kind of similar. They both use money, they both involve commodities, but their internal logic, and more importantly, their ultimate goal are complete opposites.
On one hand, you have simple trade, which he writes as CMC. You start with a commodity, sell it for money, and then use that money to buy a different commodity you want. Pretty straightforward. But then you have the circuit of capital, MCM prime. Here, you start with money, use it to buy a commodity, only to sell it again for, you guessed it, more money. See how they're inverted? That reversal isn't just a quirky detail, it's a massive shift in economic purpose, and it's the very thing we need to understand. So let's really pull these two formulas apart. To get to the bottom of where capital comes from, we first have to get a solid grip on what makes each of these circuits tick.
First up, the simple one, CMC. Let's say you're a weaver. You start with a commodity, your linen. You take it to the market and sell it for some money, let's say £2. Then you take that £2 and you buy something totally different that you actually need, like a Bible. The start and end points are different things, one for weaving, one for reading. The goal here is just to get something useful. The money, it's just the middleman.
Now let's look at the circuit of capital, MCM. This is a whole different ballgame. The capitalist starts with a pile of money, not a product. They use that money to buy commodities, things like cotton or maybe machinery. Then, after some process happens, a new commodity gets sold for more money than they started with. The weird thing here is that you start with money and you end with money. The whole thing seems kind of pointless unless a change in quantity happens.
And that right there reveals the huge difference in motivation. The CMC circuit, it's all about use value. The whole point is to satisfy a need, to get something you can use. The money is spent, and the story ends. The MCM circuit, though, is driven by the hunt for exchange value. The goal is to make the original amount of money grow. The money isn't spent, it's advanced. It's put out into the world with the sole expectation that it's going to come back bigger. So this brings us to the central puzzle, the big contradiction that Marx sets out to solve. If the entire goal is to end up with more money than you started with, where in the world does this extra cash actually come from?
I mean, just look at it. The form MCM, if the first M and the last M are the same, is just absurd. Why on earth would you go through all the trouble of trading your money for a commodity just to trade it right back for the same amount of money? It's a completely circular, pointless exercise. You gain nothing.
So the only way this circuit makes any rational sense is if there's a quantitative change. The entire process is only justified if that final pot of money, the M prime, is bigger than the initial pot of money, M. The goal isn't qualitative, it's purely about expansion.
And Marx gives this little bit of extra money a very specific name. He calls it surplus value. He writes it out as M prime equals M plus delta M. That little delta, that triangle, just means an increment of. This surplus isn't just profit in an accounting spreadsheet. For Marx, it's the very lifeblood, the whole point of capitalist production.
To make it super simple, if a capitalist puts in £100 and at the end of the whole process they have £110, that extra £10, that's the surplus value. And making that £10 is the only reason the whole thing happened in the first place.
And here's the fundamental problem, the million-dollar question. If we assume that markets are generally fair, that things are being bought and sold for what they are actually worth, the exchange of equivalences it's called, then where did this extra tenner come from? It's like it just appeared out of thin air. It seems logically impossible.
So, like any good detective, Marx starts by ruling out the most obvious suspects. Let's see if we can figure out if this surplus value could just be created in the marketplace, in the act of buying and selling itself.
So could the surplus just come from savvy capitalists who are great at selling things for more than they're worth, or maybe buying things for less than they're worth? The old buy cheap, sell dear? Well, Marx says no. Sure, an individual can get rich that way, but that can't explain how the entire capitalist class gets richer. It's just a transfer of existing value. It's a zero-sum game. What one person gains by overcharging, another person loses. That doesn't create a net increase of value in the whole system.
And Marx sets a really important ground rule for our investigation. He insists we have to solve this puzzle without breaking the fundamental laws of the market. We have to assume that, on average, everything is bought and sold at its true value. No cheating allowed. The explanation has to work even in a perfectly fair market. Okay, so if surplus value can't be made just by clever buying and selling, if it doesn't come from the marketplace, then by process of elimination, we have to look somewhere else. Its source has to be hiding outside the sphere of circulation.
Let's look at that formula again. M, C, M prime. We've just ruled out that the magic happens during the M to C transaction or the C to M prime transaction. So, what's left? There's only one place the secret could be hiding. It has to be in the C itself, in that time after it's been bought, but before it's been sold. The change has to be happening during its consumption.
The expansion of value, therefore, has to come from the commodity that was bought in that first step, MC. The trick, so to speak, isn't in the exchange, but in what the capitalist is able to do with that commodity once they own it.
And this, right here, is the crucial clue. The change in value can't come from the commodity's price tag, its exchange value. It has to come from its use value. The source of all this new money is hidden in the specific way the commodity is used, in the unique process of its consumption. So it follows that our capitalist needs to find a very, very peculiar commodity out there on the market. They need to find a commodity whose special talent, whose unique use value, is that it can create new value. A commodity that when you consume it actually produces more value than it costs to buy in the first place.
Marx gives us this really potent, kind of Gothic metaphor here. He describes capital, the money, the machines, as dead labor. And he says it acts like a vampire that can only live by sucking living labor. This points us directly to the source of new life, new value that gets this whole circuit going.
Which leaves us with this final, decisive question. What is this one special commodity that you can buy on the open market just like anything else, whose unique feature is the ability to create more value than it costs? A commodity that, when it's consumed, generates a surplus. The answer to that question is the master key that unlocks Marx's entire analysis, and it's exactly what we're going to tackle in our next explainer.